It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Final instant reaction pod of the season. What's up? What's happening? Welcome in to Take Command from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. Logan, in a season with 17 games, the Commanders have somehow figured out how to finish 500.
I mean, that's awesome. Like golly, like it was like I didn't know what to expect. I was a little less than optimistic this week.
Yeah.
But man, like holy cow, good for them. Way to come out. I know this doesn't mean anything in like the grand universe of winning football games, but I got the sense that Dallas was trying to win this game in the first half, at least. Maybe the first three quarters, and it wasn't like they were walking out the backups. So good for them. And I feel much better about the offseason. I'll tell you that they're not going in on how many game losing streak would that have been? 5-game losing streak?
Yeah. Well, you have the old soccer terminology, winless streak, because they had the tie in there. They were 0-3-1 over the last four, right. So now 1-3-1, which when you say it that way isn't much better. But I don't know, man. Like I got to say, I'm conflicted because I said this on the show during the week. I said, you're going to get to the game Sunday and you're going to have spent all week telling yourself it's better to lose, it's better to lose, it's better to lose. And ultimately it cost them 2 draft spots. Not a huge deal.
So what is it, 14? What are they?
They're now 16 actually is where they're going to wind up drafting, assuming they hold on to the pick this year. But it would have been 14 if they lost. It could have been higher if other teams had different results today. But by the time they took the field, there actually wasn't that much to see there, so to speak. But either way, like it doesn't matter. And then you're going to get into the game, and you're going to get into the usual emotions of a football game, and you're going to want Sam Howell to do well, and you're going to want them to win, no matter how badly you know that it's not actually the best thing for the franchise long term, because draft position matters, and that's the only thing that was going to be affected in terms of the Commanders football wise from the outcome of the game. But emotionally, I would still say, Logan, I'm conflicted. And the reason is pretty simple. And we will get into Sam Howell's performance and some of the details. And I know that's what most people are clicking on this podcast for. But I got to say, man, watching them play with that amount of intensity and discipline and everything in a game that means nothing, the week after they laid a pretty significant egg, at least offensively last week, it sucks. It just sucks. And I don't know fully what to do with it. Ron was asked about it pretty early on in his press conference, and he got pretty touchy about it, basically saying, like, don't question their effort. They played hard last week, and it just didn't go their way. And there's probably more truth to that than most fans would like to admit. And the quarterback play was so bad, and the play calling was so bad, and they weren't set up for success last week. But watching that game today, being reminded like what the better version of this football team looks like, seeing frankly what it looks like with a quarterback who can make some plays, playing well, or at least decently, making plays, not even playing great. It felt like he played great because it's been so bad. It was nice feeling to go into the offseason that way, but also it's frustrating as hell.
Yeah. Yes. So a couple things. Let's unpack that for a second. I do think that this is valuable. I know that people want to say, we want higher draft picks, but going into the offseason with a little bit of momentum, beating a rival, beating the second best team in the division, like that does something for you. I know it's like there's no way to kind of categorize the touchy-feely emotions of a football team, but that can kind of spark you, in going into next season, a nice big win like that late in the year. So I think that is something that, as much as people want to say, we lost 2 draft spots and that could be the difference between player X and player Y, I really look at this and I say to myself, like, probably 2 of the top tackles will be available. There's some good DBs available. If you want a quarterback, one might fall to you there. So not the end of the world. If you want to trade up, you probably could from that spot. But again, like, I think that this has value. And I think the other thing that's really valuable about this is just watching the young guys just play like their hair was on fire. Percy Butler running all over the field. Khaleke Hudson, the first signs of life we've seen from him in a long time. So that was great to see.
That was pretty wild.
Outside of special teams, you know what I mean? So to see him on the field in defensive reps playing well. John Ridgeway was an absolute man-child for the first probably 4 or 5 drives of that game before he got hurt. The backup number 79 was like quick swimming, like Nick Martin, one of the best guards in the game. Kendall Fuller looked like that dude again. Forrest, I don't know what it is, just adding that piece in the secondary, that cam curl piece for like which Percy kind of took over today. Let Forrest kind of settle in, let Bobby kind of settle back into their normal spots, and then Danny Johnson played great. So I think defensively, I mean, obviously, I think you need to acknowledge the fact that the Cowboys offense was bad today.
Yeah, I mean, Dak Prescott was literally one of the worst of his career performance-wise. I mean, it was his career low in completion percentage.
Absolutely, but I do think that while it's a little bit him, it's also a little bit the Commanders' defense, and they deserve some credit. And then to your point about them playing hard last week, I definitely think the dudes played hard last week against Cleveland, and I think that's hard for fans to kind of internalize because they lost and it looks so bad. But when I pull clips for Coach's Show, I watch every single snap, offense and defense, and there were so many positive defensive snaps. I'd say there was probably 6 bad ones, and every other one was just like, wow, look at this guy shed this block, butt this guard, look at this tackle by Jamin, look at Payne, you know what I mean? And that is a good sign, you know what I mean? And so to Ron's point, I think that's 100% right, and I think to your point, the quarterback play last week was such that it was kind of non-tenable from an offensive standpoint. So, and you mentioned the play calling, we'll get into that more later, but I do think that this game was great to see those young guys. So obviously the win has its kind of psychological advantages for the young guys. To see them step up in those roles was huge. I love to see Patterson out there. That was great. And then obviously Sam Howell. I think he deserves some credit. And we can. Do you want to talk about this now, or do you want to talk about it later?
I was going to say, yeah, let's get into it. That's what most people are here for. Set the timestamp, Matt. Let's make sure this is in the description, so people can just fast forward through everything else we've said and get to the part that they want. How do you think Sam Howell played? Because undeniably, he made plays. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. It doesn't take someone who played 10 years like yourself to play that out. And I guess, Logan, my prediction for what this will be is he made plays. It's going to look worse on tape than we think it is right now. But ultimately, obviously, there was something there. There was the spark there, frankly, that they were looking for last week with Wentz that they just didn't get.
Yeah, I think that was it, like the spark. And I think, there were some things. Obviously, the interception wasn't great. He had a couple footwork issues. I think I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he got stepped on for one of them. Loved how he kind of manipulated the pocket. Obviously, not super complicated reads. The throw to Jahan is like a 2-man route concept. He's literally reading one route, and you're basically saying our receiver's better than your corner. He's going to get open. Jahan on the choice, again, that's a one-person read with the middle of the field open. Really nice play design by Scott there. Kudos to him, and great route by Jahan. And then again, the Terry thing is the same play as the Jahan play, but he's running a go. So a lot of big chunks in this offense from a passing game standpoint come off of relatively simple stuff. Now, all Sam Howell detractors are going to be like, Logan, you're such a hater. He needs the arm strength. He needs the release. He needs to get the ball there. And that was the thing that really kind of stuck out to me. And we talked about it on the pregame show today, was the quick release, right? And how the defense just wasn't ready for that. They weren't ready
ball
for
flies out of his hand. And by the way, if you're someone who's been lucky enough like I have to cover the NFL, or in your case, play in it, and you're around elite arm talent, that is a trait that you learn to look for. Yeah. And one of there's certain guys that if you watch them throw pregame, I remember Aaron Rodgers when he was here for a preseason game, watching him throw. Tell you, one of the first guys I ever saw it with was Jared Goff. There's a reason that kid went 1-1 overall. The ball flies. It almost looks like it jumps out of his hand.
Right.
And Sam Howell has that. And to see that he has it on television is it's one thing when you see it in person. I mean, I even remember going to games as a kid in Carolina and watching Cam Newton throw from the 500s, and the ball looked like it jumped from his hand to the receiver's chest, and you could hear the thump of the pads from the 500 seats. Yeah. Howell has that. There's other stuff that made him a 5th-round pick, but arm talent-wise, it's up there. He's got an A arm.
And I think you see, again, the advantage of a guy with a big arm, but also a guy with a quick release. So his arm in terms of power is probably a little bit less than Carson. Maybe they're in the same sphere.
Right. If they were going to throw a long ball competition,
Carson probably wins.
Yeah. But if there is who can get a slant to the receiver faster.
That's what I was going to, right? Is that look at the protection with him, and look how the ball is out of his hand. So instead of this big, long, deliberate wind up, right? It's just look at the wrist. I'm throwing a dart. and the ball is there. And I think the slant to Jahan I thought was excellent. It gets tipped, shows you the power behind that ball. It's still tipped and hits its mark. So I think that was the thing that really stood out to me. And it stood out to me in practice this week, but it's hard to know because you're like, this is basically like a glorified walkthrough. So how right. ahead of the schedule is he? But it
as you said on the pregame show this morning, Taylor Heinicke was out there playing safety.
So it's hard to tell. But that was, I think, a huge factor in terms of insulating the offensive line. And I think if you're Scott, you kind of say, like, this is what a version of this is. You know what I mean? Like, I think they got to more play pass. Kudos to Scott. Leaned into that a little bit more, which I like. I think they need to do that. But I think you see kind of what this offense can do in terms of stretching the field with that guy with that elite trait and the ability to get the ball out quickly. Now, I think the most important element of his game that was on display tonight was simply the scrambles, right? The off-schedule scramble stuff. Like, that's something that Taylor could have brought to this offense, but for whatever reason was just reluctant to do so, or whatever the reason is, right?
Yeah.
So you get 2 third down conversions, you get a touchdown off a design quarterback run, and look at what just make a 1-to-1 comparison him to Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones elevates the New York Giants offense consistently, not because of the completions he makes. I mean, that's obviously a big part of what he does, but it's the scrambles, it's the design quarterback runs, and that's what Sam Howell gives you. He gives you the ability to put the defense consistently in a bind, and that's what you saw today. Now, can you do that consistently? Can he do that consistently? Can he sustain that over the course of a year? Those are all questions that remain to be outstanding. But I think you see some of the things that make people excited about him. And from a playmaking standpoint, we mentioned the rookie quarterbacks that have all played. I think he was probably the best playmaker after watching tonight of the group of guys you listed. I'm trying to remember all of them, but I think
Pickett,
that's probably true.
Willis,
just
all those guys.
I mean, maybe not
Purdy.
maybe not Pickett, but definitely Purdy, Zappy, Desmond Ridder. The ability to elevate through kind of just go outside and let's get open by the mailbox type of stuff. Like, that was pretty cool.
My favorite route.
Yeah, it's the best one. And then I think it's interesting because you get the best of Carson from a physical standpoint and the best of Taylor kind of melded together. And you get a guy who, again, I liked him. Obviously, I like him, but I was unsure of how that would play. And he came out and did a great job. I will say, for whatever reason, Dallas didn't pressure as much as I thought they would. I thought they would just straight, like, 100-mile-an-hour fastball every time, but that didn't seem to be what they wanted to do, and I think it hurt them, actually. Like, I think if Dan Quinn could do that again, I think he'd say, we need to put some more, put the screws to this kid and heat him up more.
Yeah, the tape is going to be very interesting, and not that we care a lot about a lot of the tape, but like, we're going to do the tape pod this week because going in depth on what he does from a process standpoint is kind of important to the evaluation moving forward. But Logan, I gotta ask. I'm gonna ask this not necessarily because I'm just gonna be honest. Like, I don't know what the right answer to this question is, but I know fans are gonna ask it. If he plays earlier, does this season look different? Because the thought from the people that are going, yes, obviously, duh, is exactly what you just said, which is that it's the playmaking that you wanted out of Wentz, the bigger arm, all that kind of stuff, the mobility of Heinicke. Like, it's the two guys melded together into one, which is what they were seemingly searching for all year. And the thought was, Howell couldn't be that guy because he was missing a different ingredient that those two had, which was experience. And that was going to cause him to make mistakes. And look, he did make mistakes tonight. Like, the red zone interception is bad. I won't want to say like Wentz or Heinicke wouldn't make it because, well, we watched the other 17 games this year, or the other 16 games this year, and we've seen them make their fair share. But the idea that, maybe he actually is the best of both of those guys, which still only gets you 169 yards, but in a game where you have a pick six and you have some short fields, like, I think there's some data manipulation happening there in terms of the statistics. But, like, is it fair to at least ask that question?
I mean, it's fair to ask the question. So, again, I'm really glad you brought that up. I think the special team snafus early by Dallas really kind of changed the landscape of this game. And obviously, there's no denying that. The pick six is a huge variable. I think, what was the total offensive production today? It was 3 field goals and a touchdown, right? So, what is that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, they also had, it could have, the funny part is, Sly left 7 points on the board by himself.
Yes.
So ultimately, they score the pick six, a touchdown, a couple of field goals. Yeah, that's it. So a couple of field goals, pick six, 2 offensive touchdowns, both by Howell. The run.
I forgot the run.
The run and the throw from Howell. They have 309 yards of total offense on 63 plays, averaged 4.9 a play.
Yeah, which isn't great. And I'm just kind of putting my argument together here in my mind. So what I would say to you is, it's not a terrible question, but I do think that one of the variables is like that. Obviously, Taylor was the backup, so he's going to get the first look. But I also think that defenses figure you out a little bit, right?
Right.
Figure out the stuff that you do a little bit. And so as much as he did a great job tonight, a little bit of that credit goes to the novelty of him. Like, I remember I was playing with Jimmy Garoppolo, and one of the things that really stood out to me is he hadn't played a lot when he first got to San Francisco. Is he just like Sam Howell, a tremendously fast release. And you could tell the defenses weren't like ready for it. They were like, holy cow, that ball, how did he get that ball out in time? Like, that should have been a sack, or I should have been there, right? And then as each week went by, you could tell they were like, okay, we got to be a little bit quicker this stuff. And they kind of started to adjust him, and he struggled a little bit more. And so I do think that there is a process that NFL defenses go through with young quarterbacks that I'm not sure that he might have experienced that. He might have been like, as much as you want to say the quarterback run elevates, the scrambles elevate, they might have said, we're not really afraid of him in these scenarios. We can put a spy on him, or we can change our rush patterns, or whatever it is. And so as you get more data, it's hard to say. I think a good case study for this is like Sam Ehlinger in Indianapolis. Like, they basically went to Sam Ehlinger because he had more mobility and they could do more quarterback run stuff. And the Commanders defense was like, cool, well, we're ready for that, so good luck. And that's kind of how Sam Ehlinger's career went for the rest of the season. And so I do think there's an element of that. I mean, I would have loved to see it. I mean, if you can go back in time and run, the multiverse simultaneously, you'd love to see what happens. But I do think people forget. I think there's like this change in perspective that Taylor did a great job for 5 weeks of kind of elevating the group and making some plays when they had to. And was it perfect? No. But I think that that was weird. And then people also forget, man, $28 million to a former MVP of the NFL who scored 27 touchdowns last year. So this idea that you go back to Wentz and it's like, oh, it should have been Sam Howell the whole time. I'm not necessarily buying that just from like a logistics standpoint. I think this is the right time to do it. You bench Taylor, you benched Wentz. Let's see what the Young Bucks got.
Yeah, I still think that, well, one, for record-keeping purposes, I don't think Wentz actually won the MVP in 2017. He was on pace to, because the knee so you guys can delete your comments now. I will still inevitably get some, and I'm going to say watch 15 more seconds of the video. And sometimes...
Yeah,
you had a Joey Nick Bosa mix up a couple weeks ago, and you said the wrong one, and then you corrected it in the next sentence, and people went nuts. I think Niners fans. So if Niners fans, if you're still here hanging out,
sorry, yeah,
what's up? We know it's Nick. It'll be fine.
I have dyslexia. The point sometimes. Here we go.
The point is, you'd be fighting this battle between defenses figuring Sam out and Sam getting better.
Yeah,
and history says that for the first little bit, the defenses will figure it out faster than the quarterback will get better. Mm-hmm. And the quarterback's ability to get better ultimately determines whether or not he's a good or bad player, right? If Sam continues to elevate and defenses don't really have answers, well, that's because, oh my God, they got a steal in the 5th round and he's great. And maybe that happens. We don't know yet. That is on the road still to come. But when you're in the middle of a playoff race, that's not the time to find that out. I think the hindsight being 2020 for last week is they should have started Heinicke. Like, it is pretty clear that going to Wentz was the wrong decision. With the data we have available now, maybe going to Howell would have been good in a must-win game, and maybe he would have done that. But I also do think that there is, and look, I think Howell's a gamer. I don't think huge pressure is going to really bother him a ton. But it is worth pointing out that on the collective of their performance, there was zero pressure for these young guys today. Yeah. And that helps them. And that's not to take away from what they did. It's just to put it in context and perspective. What happens when you need to play well versus you can go out and do whatever it is and kind of let free? That freedom, and it's on Ron and the staff ultimately to try to create that atmosphere as often as possible where guys can feel like they go play free and not be scared of making mistakes. But they are human beings. And whether it's Sam, whether it's Benning, the D lineman that we were talking about, whether it's David Botto, whether it's Danny Johnson.
Butler looked like an absolute lunatic today. Yeah.
Like, these guys are flying around making plays because F it, this is our chance, and it doesn't matter what happens, win or lose. No one's relying on us. It's us for us and us for each other. And that's an amazing mental state to be able to go play football in, and trying to then take that performance and push it into games that matter doesn't translate. We have mountains and mountains of data that suggest such.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. I think you said something there that is very true, and I think might have been the reason why they were so reluctant to play him is because he is a gamer. He seems to, when the lights come on, he seems to just be a little bit better, right? Preseason, same thing. I remember watching in training camp, and you saw the ability, but you also saw a lot of the kind of, whoa, what was that? And I'm not saying he's a gamer in the same way Taylor Heinicke is a gamer, because Taylor Heinicke in practice sometimes looks just flat bad. Like Sam just looked like kind of middle of the road, right? And so for him to come out and play like that, I think that is, again, speaks to the type of guy that he is. And also being loose and having nothing to play for. Like, we have not seen Percy Butler play like this since he's been here. And he's been on defense before. And so for him just to be out there, just letting it rip, I think, again, speaks to this mindset that you're talking about. Number 79, Billy, is that his name?
Benning. Potoa'e, I believe, is the correct pronunciation.
A lot of vowels.
I apologize to Benning. Ron also in his post game was like, "Oh God, he played so well, and I'm going to mess up his name." So, apologies to Benning, but we're calling Benning because that's his first name.
That's his first name.
We can get that correct.
And for him just to go out there and, like, he's played before and not played that loose and not look that good. And so for him to get out there and be, like I said, quick swimming guards and ripping gaps and doing stuff, and even like Ridgeway did a great, like, every single, like, kind of lower mid-tier roster guy just looked great. And I think a little bit of that is because of what you described. And so I got a question for you, and it's something that I think is very telling about whether or not he should have started earlier. Is he your starter for 2023, Sam Howell?
I think it's too early to say. And, like, at the end of the day, he threw for 169 yards. But also, like, I don't know. I feel like we do need to talk about – hold on. I want to come back to this. I'm not skating your question.
Okay, yeah.
What did you make of the way they called the game today? Because they only threw the ball 19 times. They rushed it today. They had 150 yards rushing, which was great. But it goes on 41 attempts. Yeah. And, like, even down in the red zone where they kicked those field goals late, like, let your guy just go for it. Like, who freaking cares about the score? And I know our buddy Mark Bullock was going nuts about that on Twitter. And it's kind of like, yeah, see how he handles the situation. Just tell Sam, hey, let's see what you can do here. I would have enjoyed seeing them have a slightly more aggressive game plan, both from I actually think that would have been a better way to play. They got in this rut in the middle of the game where it was run, third down, see what can happen, nothing, punt. And they got in this rut in the middle of the game. And I actually don't think it was the best way to play. Right. So when I see like 11 for 19, 169 yards, a touchdown, a pick, and a rushing touchdown, I'm like, that's a hell of a stat line considering the game they called. And if he's going to do that and they probably open it up a little bit more and he gets better, like, yeah, sure, fine. He can be quarterback one next year. But that's one game, and to pretend like that's how it works is naive and silly. So what did you think of how they called the game? And then we can circle back to where he fits in.
I mean, I think the game was called, like we mentioned, the special team snafu, the pick six. Like, it's called because of that. You can be uber conservative because you've got a 13-point lead. Your defense is playing like the best they've played in a couple of weeks, or the most.
By the way, they won time of possession 36-12 to 23-48.
Yeah, like they're maybe not the most consistent, right? Maybe that's a better way to put it. Most consistent they've played in the last couple of weeks, and so I've got a rookie quarterback. I'm going to be a little conservative. I agree with you. I think that, like, there was the third quarter where they had like those 2 or 3, maybe 4 3-and-outs kind of back to back. And I thought, this is so painstakingly obvious you're going to run the football. And then the next sequence, they were like, play action to Jahan, choice to Jahan, down into the red zone.
And by the way, they did it out of big personnel.
Yeah,
where has that been all year? Like, there were certain things they did today that I'm just like, why now? Yeah. What on earth were you waiting for?
Yeah. And so I think that was the thing that was a little frustrating, because I'm like, yeah, I understand you've got the game in the bag. You feel really good about it, but you can execute a good conservative offense and still find chunk plays. And I think that's what they found there. I think it was like late in the third, early fourth quarter, because then the next drive is the big play to Terry. And then they were after that, they were like fully in neutral for the rest of the game, because it was
right.
like
And that point,
left. Yeah. But I think like that is something that Scott has done. The staff has done. I don't know if that's Ron's influence, because he's very adamant about that. That I think could be looked at and kind of analyzed critically this offseason, saying, gosh, first down, play action pass is going to be super effective. It's going to be really easy. They're going to be in a very simple coverage structure. They're not going to blitz. Let's get the ball out there. If it's 2nd and 10, I don't care if we run the football. Let's run the football. We'll get to whatever. What is it, 3rd and 6, which is what we'd be at anyway if we ran it twice. So just finding different ways, finding the rhythm of the game, I think is what I really want to see. Because there's elements where Scott does stuff and you're like, that is so clean and tight. And you can tell he's feeling it. He's like, I know this play, I'm going to the next play, bang, 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 bang. And then there's other times where it's like, oh, it's a little bit more labored. You can feel him kind of thinking through it. Everything is kind of analyzed, overanalyzed. And I just would like him Scott, I'm talking about, to just say, hey, I'm feeling it. Let's go. First half of the Atlanta game, second half of the second Giants game, right? The first New York Giants game, where he's just dealing. He's calling play action. He knows what he's doing. He knows what the defense is going to give him, and he's got the answers, as opposed to the other way around, which is what I felt like was happening here. But again, to defend him, game flow was dictating that if you want to win this game, which I think Ron did. I mean, I think that's pretty.
Yeah, he did. I just think that's a stupid way to approach the game.
Right. No, I agree.
Given the fact that the score doesn't matter. I thought Greg Olsen had a great quote during the broadcast, and Greg obviously played under Scott in Carolina. Norv and Scott. Scott was the QB coach, and then ultimately the OC when Norv stepped down in Ron's final year. He goes, Scott has a very creative mind, and sometimes he can overthink things. And I was like, that is astute.
Yeah.
That is how you get to be the number one analyst on Fox, is by saying things that succinctly, that well. Also, you had a nice career, and you're good on television and all that kind of stuff. Olsen, and you're tight end, obviously, tight ends, best analysts there are. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting from Olsen, and I think it's correct, and it's kind of what we've said all year. Like, Scott is a guy that is really good on certain designs. He can get in this groove where he's awesome, and you're like, wow, you are feeling it. And then he just loses his mind, and you're like, what are you doing? The thing that was working, why did you stop it? Yeah. And there was definitely moments like that today. They were on, I think, in the first half. They got real sideways in the third quarter, and then all of a sudden it was like they hit a reset button and came out. And they came out in this formation they haven't shown all year. Yeah. They're in like this full house pistol formation with 2 tight ends, and next thing you know, Jahan's running up the sideline. And you're like, where did that come from? Right. You threw out a big personnel on first down. What? What?
It's brilliant. You know what I mean? Like, and that's you see those little moments, right? But they're usually kind of shrouded in like long moments of like, you know what I mean? So like, I think that's why it's so hard to say, like, just say, throw Scott out, because there are elements of what he does that's really smart, really intuitive. They challenge defenses, and like we've talked about that, like there's things we like, but also there seems to be long swaths of period where it's like, man, like that's not
the game flow.
That's not your
the
best
game feel. Yeah. For whatever it's worth, I don't feel like it's appropriate to make predictions about people's jobs. That feels very.
Oh, are we supposed to do that?
I mean, people do it. I don't love doing that. I mean, I guess if I was like a reporter and was asked,
I hate talking about people getting fired.
No, I know you do, and I also hate that. Realistically, like, could we make predictions based off just cold data and what we think? Sure. I think at this point, folks, if you've been listening long enough, you know how we feel about the job that Scott has done. And, based off that, we'll see. Ron was, of course, asked about staff changes in the postgame press conference. He said those decisions will happen this week. From a schedule standpoint, Ron will not speak tomorrow. They'll do locker clean out 9 a.m., so all the players will be in and out of the locker room over, typically it's about a 3-hour period that the reporters are in there as the guys clean out their lockers and speak and do that. And then Martin Mayhew and Ron are scheduled to speak on Tuesday at a time TBD. I would imagine that if they're going to make a change, they do it by then. Although there's a chance they could do it right after. But to me, it seems like, you make that, you have so much of the data already, like whether it's Scott or someone else, like you've been working with them all year. You have a feel for how it's gone. I'd hope that the last game doesn't influence that too much. It's not like you're going back and rewatching every game and being like, oh, should we? Because you eventually have to get started on this stuff. Like you have to get started on the hiring process. And you also want to give guys chances to get other jobs. So these things tend to happen pretty quickly if they're going to happen. So I would imagine by Tuesday, if there's going to be a new offensive coordinator or any other changes next year, that we will know. Of course, tomorrow is considered Black Monday in the NFL, so changes will be happening around the league tomorrow, and we'll see how that all goes. All right, back to your go ahead.
Do you think this game affects Ron's decision at all? I know it probably shouldn't, but do you think it will?
Yes, I frankly do. I don't know that it'll be enough to sway him. Like I tend to think that Ron has made up his decision. And again, I just said we're not going to do predictions, but I do not think that Scott will be back next year based off of how things went in key moments. That said, I do think Ron can, if Ron was looking for a reason to convince himself to keep Scott, and he's a very loyal guy, which is admirable as a human and sometimes it doesn't serve him well as a coach, but is admirable as a human trait, right? It reflects well of Ron's character. He can look at some of the stretches today and go, if I can just get him to do that more often. And I think this is often where Ron has gotten himself in trouble with, including like with Carson this year, frankly, where you convince yourself that if you could just get the good parts more often, instead of realizing that the mark of how good someone is as a player or coach at this level is how consistent they are, not how talented, what their upside is, then you'd be in better shape. And I think if Ron was on the fence and leaning towards getting Scott or bringing Scott back, he could see enough in this performance to do that. If he was looking the other way, I don't think it would be enough to save him.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, everyone talks about Ron's loyalty as kind of in a negative way, but I do think there are elements of Jamin and Forrest and some of these guys that have come along because Ron's been patient with them, and obviously 3 years is different than a year or whatever it was with Jamin and, or Forrest or any of these other guys. So, I'm not going to make a prediction on it. Whatever happens, I hope it's the best for the organization, best for Scott, and it works out for everybody. But man, it's going to be a tough couple days for not only this team, but teams around the NFL for sure.
No doubt. All right. Last thing to circle back to your question. What is Sam Howell next year? Ron was asked about a post game, as you would imagine. And he said, he was asked, is he QB1 next year? He'll be QB something. I'm not going to put a number on it, which is a pretty funny answer from Rivera. To me, he's QB2.
Yeah.
And depending on who you bring in, he gets a chance to compete to be QB1. I think he showed enough today that he should be able, especially if you bring in let's call it a low-level veteran. Yeah. You bring in someone in the Marcus Mariota class, and you just go, "Hey, look, here's my thing on quarterback. I'll say this now. I will say it. I'll be saying it again on the radio and on this podcast moving forward. The one thing I would commit to today for quarterback is not spending a lot of money on it. I think this team, as currently constructed, has a chance to be good if they can get competent quarterback play with the occasional big play. And I think re-signing Daron Payne, building out the offensive line is a better path forward than spending a ton of money on quarterback and skimping in other areas and hoping that your quarterback can bail you out. Because as we learned this year, even though it worked in reverse, they spent a bunch of money at quarterback, that guy got hurt.
Yeah.
And it's too risky. I would rather go with a more sustainable strategy unless you can somehow get a sure thing. And that's just not going to be available this offseason. Look, the best possible outcome of spending big is signing Lamar Jackson to a large contract. Lamar hasn't played in 2 months.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, I would rather not spend a lot of money. And whether it's a guy like David Blau, who played decently well last week in Arizona, I didn't see how he played today. Well, you watch that guy and you're like, oh, he's got a decent little arm. He's picked up the offense pretty quick for Kingsbury out there. Or Marcus Mariota, or someone that cost you $10 million or less.
Yeah.
If it's that kind of player, Sam Howell gets to compete with that guy, and I would probably, if today, put money on Sam Howell beating that guy out.
Yeah.
If it's a rookie that you draft in the first round, Sam Howell's your backup.
I was going to say, yeah.
And you also need to bring in a veteran to round out the room.
Yeah. Do you think that veterans, I mean, this is so early in the offseason, but do you think that veteran could be Taylor Heinicke? Or
I think it could be. I think it could be. I think Taylor, I get why Taylor would want to go. I think there is something a little bit to the celebrity backup thing that you talked about. That pissed a lot of people off. But I'm like, were you at the stadium last week when they were chanting Heinicke, Heinicke? But if it's the right circumstances, where Taylor is the backup to a first-round pick, that's not happening. Right. The problem is Taylor's not going to want to be the 3. He's going to want to go somewhere and get a chance to start and be the 2 or whatever. And so I feel like it's a tough situation to bring Heinicke back. But if you could, and especially if you bring Turner back, yes, I would prefer. I think I would deal with the celebrity stuff. And that's not a shot at Taylor. Really, it's a shot, if anything, at the fan base and how they react to Taylor. I would bring Taylor back.
That's interesting because it's almost like I was going to say because you can't bring Taylor and Sam back together because then then Sam's the starter, right? Is that the way you kind of look at it? Or
if you're ready to make Howell QB1 and Taylor's like, yeah, I'll be QB2, then sure, that could work. I don't think that doesn't seem. I don't feel like that's smart.
Yeah, I think I agree. You need to bring someone in to compete for the position. I don't think he should just walk into that. He played well today, but he's a 5th-round draft pick. Yeah, and it's one game. It's one data point. I don't think this precludes them from drafting a quarterback either. I think that's still on the table. That's a very interesting proposition, I think, if they are to draft a quarterback. 16, from what I've been reading, there are some guys that might slip to you. The kid from Florida might slip to that spot. The kid from Stanford will definitely be available, probably more of a 2nd-round pick. So interesting conundrum to be in. But then it goes back to your question: is like, can you build around Sam Howell? Like, if let's say you got an offensive lineman, let's say you got a free agent guard, you drafted an offensive tackle. And then you got a big free agent cornerback or drafted a cornerback in the next year's draft. Like, that team's pretty stacked all of a sudden, and
you re-sign Payne, whether it's on the franchise tag or a long-term deal. Chase comes back. He's looked good on every game he's played. Yeah. Montez has a couple monster plays today and reminds you of who he is. John comes back. Jamin's back. You probably need another linebacker. But again, that's a position they've de-emphasized. In terms of importance, Cam comes back. I think
some young pieces there.
Yeah, if the tight ends develop and they ever actually throw them the ball.
Yeah, I mean that's it. And we haven't even talked about Curtis Hodgins, who's still on the team. And they like a lot. And I don't think that bodes super well for Logan Thomas coming back. But we'll get into that. I
don't think he's coming back. But that's a different conversation.
So the Payne thing I think is interesting too, and we've talked about this a little bit. I almost think it'd be better to franchise tag him because I don't think you're going to have enough money to pay him long term. So franchise tag and then trade, and then you get 2 first-round picks this year. I think that. What do you think about that? Was something
if you can get the 2 first-rounders, that's appealing. I will say I think I'm on record as saying re-signing Payne is pretty close to a must because I think what makes this defense special is those 2 dudes together.
Right.
It is just so much different than any other team can put out there, and they wreak so much havoc that I think it is worth it to be that invested at that position. Now, I do think that probably winds up costing you Montez or Chase moving forward,
right?
But I would be okay with that.
Well, the other thing,
I think what you proved this year, just real quick to wrap that thought, I think what you proved this year is if you have one of those guys and a James Smith-Williams, a Casey Tuhill, and F.A. Obata level player, you can still be hella good across the offensive line.
Yeah. But I think the same thing.
Or defensive line.
Yeah, the same thing is true though, because I think if you take even today, you have Payne, Ridgeway to start the game, and that front looks like he doesn't miss a beat, And so I think having one elite interior player and then 2 elite edge players or whatever it is, I think is also something to consider. But I think right now with how Payne played, people are going to be willing to give up a lot to get him. Like he was probably top 5 at the position. I think that's fair to say. I'd have to go back and watch like the kid from Miami who had a great year. But, of the guys that are in my head, probably top 5 at the position. And you say to yourself, like, we won't be able to sustain this long term. So can we get a 1st-round pick? Can we pick another defensive whatever it is? I do think whatever it is, you need to make sure you get some type of value for him instead of letting him walk.
I will say this. Ridgeway playing well all year probably has some level, and I don't want to get too far into this in part because we have all off season
Right.
to talk
We're
about
just,
it. But
we're
like,
just talking ball, yeah.
you got Phil Mathis, second rounder from last year, waiting in the wings. Ridgeway, Allen, like that's a pretty good front, a pretty good rotation of interior guys. Nevertheless, if you were to draft one more, or if you think like David Botta or whoever can be your fourth, and then if Sweat and Young and James is still here for another year, Casey and James are the same year. So
same
Casey's
year.
got 2 years, or no, so they're the same year. So Casey and James both have one more year.
Right.
I mean, you're looking at a pretty talented front.
So again, like just if you can, and again, that first round pick that you could get, I legitimately think you could probably get a first and a third for him off the franchise tag, and then they'll pick up his deal, or they'll give him the extension.
Right.
That's a big deal, especially with Carson, the stuff you gave up for Carson, especially if you want to move around for a quarterback.
That's true.
It's a big piece. So that's something that I think is going to be really compelling this offseason. I know we're like way ahead on that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's something that we'll spend a lot more time on. In fact, we'll probably do multiple shows almost entirely on that topic, the way these things tend to go in the offseason. I certainly will do entire radio shows on it, it feels like. But there's also like levels of good decisions. It doesn't like if re-signing Payne will work out for you. Trading Payne for a first and a third should probably also work out for you. So they're in a good position there, no matter how that winds up. All right. We've actually done a lot more than I anticipated for this podcast, but that's fine. There's so much to talk about. I will say, doing this off a win does feel better. There's no doubt, like emotionally, that is true. As for where we all go from here, we'll all go together. The good news is that this podcast is not going anywhere. Starting next week, we will get into our off-season rhythm. This week, we will kind of do the same thing that we have been. So Wednesday, we will look back. I'm going to say we're going to look back at the tape, mostly Howell, but we'll also get into some of Chris Paul, how he played, Percy Butler, some of these other young guys, how they played, and then obviously whatever news comes out of Open Locker Room on Monday and Rivera and Mayhew's press conference on Tuesday. We'll react to that as well. Friday, we can kind of do, instead of a game preview, an off-season preview. And then next week, we will get into, like, we can do, what do they do with Deron Payne? We can do the quarterback discussion. Like, we'll have all these off-season podcasts. We'll talk a little bit of playoffs as well. We'll have some of our friends back on. When I say our friends, like not just random buddies, but John Keim, Sam Fortier from the Washington Post is someone I know we've both been talking to about some X's and O stuff that Sam's had in some pieces that are really, really excellent work by Sam. And I want to have him on the podcast so we can go super deep on that. Nikki Javala is fantastic. Michael Phillips, who's on with me every week on Mondays. We haven't had him on the pod in a while. So like we'll have everybody on. We'll try to reconnect with some of our national friends too. Eric Edholm for sure, who's NFL Media's draft guru. And I've had Eric on shows for years when he was back with Yahoo. So as we get in more towards the prospects, like Eric is kind of my top of mind guy that we'll have on. And so we'll be doing plenty of stuff here on Take Command. So with that, make sure you're subscribed everywhere that you are consuming this product right now, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, or any other podcast platform. If you're watching it, youtube.com/@1067 The Fan is where you get the full episodes. I've got clips as well at Craig Hoffman on YouTube. Thanks so much for listening. Not just today, but all season long. We were one of the first podcasts in our network that launched back in April, and to watch this thing grow through the off season and then ultimately into the season has been so much fun. The community that we built, people commenting, people sending us, messages on Instagram and Twitter and the whole thing, calling into the radio show. I feel like this podcast really took off over the last month, and watching that happen has been really cool. So hopefully we continue that growth in the off season. So long story short, if you like it, tell a friend and tell them to tell a friend too. For Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see y'all in a couple of days right back here on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.